What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review after 100% for Dragon Quest VII Reimagined. A remake, of course, of Dragon Quest VII that aims to both change the pacing, kind of streamline it a bit, in fact, while also updating it with some quality of life features and everything that make what was, in fact, a massive game much easier and approachable for people like myself, admittedly, who are trying to play it for the first time. But before we get into all of that, to get my usual stuff out of the way, I review games after 100% all the time to set me apart from other reviewers on the platform, and while it does include the achievements, it also includes a lot more than that. There's a link below covering everything I go over, and my Steam profile is public and linked below as well. And to that end, I do also need to inform you that I did in fact receive a review key for this. Even though we're pushing about a week since this game launched, I got the review key a little bit before the game officially released, so I did have a little bit of a head start, but obviously not enough to get through the whole thing. And in particular, I would say, as far as 100% goes, the only part of this that was a little bit tricky was getting all of the items that you can collect. Luckily, though, there's actually in-game resources for most of this, like there's complete lists of everything you're looking for, both for defeating all the monsters, collecting everything, that kind of stuff. So while it definitely can be a little tedious, I don't feel like it should prove particularly difficult, all things told. Otherwise, let's talk about the actual game itself. So, I've been playing through the Dragon Quest series somewhat systematically with some of these remakes, having played through the Erdrick trilogy as part of those remakes. And like myself, you should be free to jump into 7, and this is because 7 is largely a standalone experience as opposed to the trilogy at the beginning. And while it may be a standalone experience, the thing that I would say this game does best is like little individual stories that then eventually coalesce into the larger narrative. We're going to experience that by hopping through time, actually, across various different islands, which each represent a world, as the game often calls it. And then as you solve problems in those worlds, you can head back to your own time and see the changes and effects that those things have had before, along the way, learning about the grander threat you're eventually going to have to tackle. And in many ways, I would say this is like a grand narrative type of JRPG, which is an interesting concept because you can definitely feel where the game has been streamlined a bit. I would say this game goes on a little long, even now, with the game being about 40 hours or so in length if you're just running through the main story specifically, whereas the original, from what I understand, was like a 100+ hour experience. And largely what I mean by that is that there's tons of characters, a good chunk of them actually get significant arcs, and while you can definitely feel that it's moving pretty quickly, and I think some of these characters probably don't get the time they deserved as a result of that, I still think they did a good job with what's on show here, and that storytelling is really the game's highlight. But let's move on a little bit to the technical state of this game. Happy to report that, for me at least, this game ran very well outside of occasionally during cutscenes I would get some like hitching, which was just enough to be annoying but not enough to actually cause a problem or, even ruin the cutscene, to be honest. Other than that, I had zero problems, and from everything I've seen, nobody else is really reporting anything major outside of the occasional crash here or there, but for me, again, ran pretty flawlessly. Which then brings us to difficulty. Now, difficulty is an odd duck when it comes to this particular game because this is not a difficult game. Because of the way some of the systems and the combat works, it's pretty easy to completely ignore all but the boss battles which you are forced to participate in. And even then, you could technically turn on the auto battle, follow orders option and potentially get through them that way as well. The reason for this is that it is definitely possible to grind up a few levels ahead of the monsters you're facing, at which point you can kill them outright without even engaging in battle to begin with. Combine that with an experience modifier in the difficulty options, which you can just increase, and it's easy to get to that point. And so you can actually experience a whole lot of this game with very minimal combat involved. And the combat you are going to partake in is also super simple because the only combat encounters that are even attempting to be challenging don't come until the post-game anyway. And that's before we even start talking about the difficulty options, because there are 3. There's easy, normal, and hard. If you don't like those, you can also actually customize some stuff individually. You can adjust how much damage is being dealt, experience earned, proficiency for your vocations, gold, the strength of the monsters you're facing, whether or not those monsters even try to attack you on the open world anyway, whether or not you restore HP after every battle. And when taking all of those things into consideration, it's just a pretty easy game even on the harder difficulty. especially if you don't mind messing around with the custom difficulty settings. And so, to that end, while I think the game does fine for what it's trying to be, it's just a remake trying to, of course, get people to play the originals that they might not have played, which are older, and just kind of have people experience what those games were about, and the challenge as a result is very on the low side. Although, as a slight aside to that, I would say that this probably would be a great JRPG to get kids into, specifically for that reason. It's not terribly complicated, and let's be honest, the art style is probably going to be fairly appealing to them. But that does bring us to the story setup and my thoughts on it. So I am not going to fully spoil everything here for a few different reasons, mostly because hopefully some people are experiencing this stuff for themselves, but also it would be difficult to spoil all of it given the very fragmented anthology-esque nature of the story anyway. Either way, though, our character starts in Pilchard Bay. Now, at the beginning of the game, it is thought that this is the only island in existence. You and your friends desperately want to get out there and explore, but as far as anyone knows, for as long as they've been able to sail, this island is it. It's luckily a peaceful world, like there's no monsters or anything for them to contend with, but there's not much going on as they're basically just a little village surviving off the sea as they can't really do anything else. And you, your friend Kiefer, the prince of the king on the island, as well as the daughter of the mayor, all are kind of just getting up to your own shenanigans, desperately wanting to explore with some of that youthful wanderlust, but, not being able to do so. And yet, through your adventures, you just so happen to discover a shrine that gives you a little task to collect some mysterious tablets, or fragments of said tablets. Having done so, you eventually get access to the inside of that shrine where you meet a character that instructs you that these tablets are going to give you the ability to travel to different places, which is how you discover the main premise. Basically, your role in the game is to try to gather up these tablets to go to different worlds, because going there and solving the problems that world has suddenly makes it reappear in the real world, or the present, which obviously comes as a huge shock to the people of today, and you're sent to explore these islands. And then much of the sort of pacing and nature of the story goes on that way. Each individual island represents its own story and happenings that you have to get to the bottom of and deal with so that island reappears in the present, at which time you can go explore it. This means that the game starts off super linear because there's really not anywhere to go, and then does open up later when you have more options. Now, along the way, as you start solving all of these problems, a couple of things to know. Several of the islands are optional, 4 of them in fact, discounting the post-game stuff. But as you participate in all of those, you're going to start noticing some themes, references to a battle between the Almighty and the Demon King of long ago. And exploring that and getting to the bottom of it starts to lead you to the conclusions about why are these islands separated in different worlds and times this way, what is causing them to reappear, all that stuff. And that serves as the crux of the main story, and without going into full spoilers, I'd say that's the most important stuff to know. I will simply say that for the most part, the individual stories of the islands are pretty good. The very first one they send you to wound up being my favorite, but there's a lot of good ones in there that explore, of course, different biomes, themes, things like that, and then some of that stuff has a direct impact on your companions, such as Kiefer, for an example. While our 3 main characters are who we're going to start the game with, we are going to pick up some people along the way. Ruff, the wolf boy, who is actually a wolf that got turned into a human. Aisha, a member of the Roamers, who have a sacred duty to try to resurrect the Almighty, who are steeped in tradition and old rites. And then lastly, Mervyn, a member of an old holy order that was trapped in between time himself. Mervyn is hilarious, by the way. And honestly, I think even streamlined as it is, the game does a good job of setting up all of these characters as well as their surrounding families and trying to hit some important plot beats about their own growth and development, which made the stories overall a lot more enjoyable. Which then brings us to the progression side of things. Progression is relatively simple. Each of our individual characters has a set of base stats, or the things they're good at and the things they're not, attack, defense, things like that, magic, etc. As you level up, those things will increase accordingly at a base. On top of that, you can then start equipping vocations. Early on in the game, these are set. You simply have a vocation that you have to use, but eventually one of the islands you get sent to will be the All Trades Abbey, which allows you to change your vocation once you complete the story there. But we're not done yet, because a little farther into the game still, you get an ability called Moonlighting, which allows you to equip 2 professions or vocations at the same time and mix and match their abilities accordingly, because each vocation has 8 ranks. As you move up in rank for that vocation, you gain skills and abilities for it. Mastering these vocations then gives you access to the other vocations in those lines, which are like the intermediate and advanced versions. The more work it is to unlock a vocation, typically the better it is. As you defeat enemies out in the world, be that quick battles or actually fighting them outright, you gain vocation points, which will increase the ranks and help you unlock these. So leveling up plus your vocation determines both your stats and then your skills that you have access to based on the vocations you have equipped. Then there are the items you will equip. These are pretty straightforward. You're going to equip armor and weapons and benefit from their stats therein. Now, curiously, the game does try to present you a very simplified version of these items, but while that's fine in the early game, you do need to start paying attention to what you're actually equipping in the late game by hitting the examine button. This is because in the late game, you can start finding things like cursed items, which give you a benefit at a huge drawback. For instance, the double-edged sword will cause you to hurt yourself as well, and the simplified version of stats won't necessarily show you that, which shouldn't really be news to you if you've played the other Dragon Quest games, as they all kind of do a similar thing and some of the item names are the same, etc. I just wanted to point out that with the way these things are presented, there's a chance you might equip some items and not realize what they're actually doing to yourself because of the simplified way it presents the stats. But as far as progression goes, that's pretty much it. Relatively simple, with the rest of it being more story progression and finding tablets and gaining access to different things. Which brings us to the gameplay and world. As mentioned earlier, the first part of the game, or the first several parts really, are a very linear experience. There's really not anywhere else you can go but forward as you explore more islands and gain access to other things. However, later on, once you've unlocked a lot of these places, you can start moving around and jumping between worlds, having conversations, potentially unlocking some of the optional places and taking out their stories, that kind of thing. That's important because as you do that, you gain access to more places to explore very generally, but also some of these islands have activities on them, such as Lucky Panel, which is a simple matching game that you can win items from, or the base arena. So the arena actually has like bronze, silver, and gold tiers as you're playing through the story, but after the game ends, you gain access to a separate arena at the same place known as Rampage Road, which has the most difficult fights the game has to offer. Now, for the most part, outside of that stuff, the main thing you're looking for as you explore is extra fragments for the tablets, so you can, of course, explore other worlds and everything. However, we see the return of some common collectible stuff like the mini-medals. There's a big catalog in-game that will tell you more or less where to find these guys. You're also looking for the 3 different keys, the Thief, Magic, and Ultimate Key, which will allow you to open up various chests and stuff. And then on top of all that, the game is pretty good about providing optional like cutscenes and stuff depending on who's in your party. Like, not always, mind you, but oftentimes, say if you have Aisha, if you take her back to the King of Estard, there's some special scenes there that can play out. So there is some stuff besides just chasing down the main story to get up to and explore and experience for yourself. And then of course there's the post game. After you actually beat the main story, you'll finally unlock access to a few different things. For starters, the last 2 worlds. You cannot access these before the post-game. The things you need in order to do that just straight up don't exist, as the tablets you need are not spawned in yet. But once you beat the game, you can go gather up some silver and gold fragments to unlock the last 2 worlds, though you do have to do the silver one first. And this is where you get access to 2 big dungeons, essentially, which have some harder fights and then give you a little post-game story, if you will. There's also Rampage Road, like I mentioned, and Rampage Road is the most difficult of all of those because Rampage Road doesn't care about your difficulty settings. It is simply, those fights are what they are and you have to rise to that challenge, and it's really the only time the game offers any sort of, I would say, real combat challenge because of how easy the rest of it is. That stuff combined with tracking everything else down means after roughly a 40-hour story or so, you're then met with I would say 15 to 20 hour post-game depending on you. Which finally then brings us to combat. So a couple of things right off the bat. This game does not feature random battles. Outside of scripted combat events where you're like, as part of the story in a fight, all the other monsters either have to be attacked by you or run into you in order to initiate combat with them, and so there is no real randomness to it. That said, if you attack an enemy outside of combat, you'll deal a little extra damage to them before combat starts and hopefully stun them or something as you go. However, once you get sufficiently above them level-wise, you can potentially just immediately kill them with these attacks. This is known as a quick battle, which will then give you a fraction of the resources you would have gotten from actually fighting them. This is a convenient way to really quickly grind up vocation points, experience, etc., depending on where you are, especially if you have the resource acquisition increased from the difficulty settings. But obviously that's not really what people are talking about when they talk about combat, so let's talk about the proper turn-based JRPG battles we have on display here. Honestly, super simple combat system. You're going to be able to attack with a character's given weapon, and their skills and abilities are going to depend on the vocations they have equipped at the time, which hopefully complement their natural stats to increase them farther and give them as much as possible. But because of how relatively easy the game is, you really don't need any super specific approach, and you can get by with most anything as long as you're not deliberately picking the worst options. Other than that, though, it's really just basic turn-based stuff. The game will tell you if you're about to attack a weakness or if the enemy's resistant by a thumbs up or thumbs down hovering over the enemy, so attack their weaknesses, make sure you heal yourself, cast the occasional buff, and you're pretty much good to go until the post-game, really. Now, as you do all of those things, your characters may well get worked up, as they call it, and this allows you to activate their big ability based on their vocations. Each vocation comes with essentially a special move they can do for this. For instance, the hero vocation, one of the final ones you'll get, has the ability to cast, I believe it's called Light of the Hero, which can potentially just lock an enemy down for a few turns, which even works on some of the in-game bosses. And of course, there's ones that just help you deal more damage by double or tripling what you're about to do, negating incoming damage, all sorts of stuff like that. And that's honestly really as simple as combat is. As strange as it may sound, it's really just not any more complicated than that. There are some extra things to know very generally, I guess, but they're hardly intrinsic knowledge you need in order to win. For instance, if you get a character with a high charm stat, you have a small chance of an enemy just being mesmerized by them or enthralled by them without you having to do anything, which will just skip their turn altogether. You can still chase down metal enemies, or metal slimes in particular, which will typically give you massive amounts of XP, which is on top of increased XP, an incredibly easy way to grind to the max level. So as a result, there's really not much else to say as far as combat goes, so we're going to go ahead and move on. Which brings us to the Steam Deck section. The Steam Deck runs this game pretty well. As the store page for the game would tell you, it has a playable rating, and the thing they dinged it for there is small text, which is fair enough. There are some screens like the vocation and stuff where there's a lot of text on a smaller screen, and I can see why they wouldn't enjoy that, but otherwise it plays quite fine. The recommended specs for this game are roughly about the hardware that the Steam Deck has, so unsurprisingly it's not going to have any real issues running this, so it seems to be in pretty good shape on that platform, which brings us to our positives and negatives, then we'll wrap this thing up. So on the positive side of things, I really enjoyed the individual stories being told here. The game does play almost as a sort of anthology in some sense, and luckily the strength of those individual stories is pretty good. I wouldn't sit here and pretend that I love all of them by any means, but for the most part, it's entertaining to kind of play through all that and even see the character development of the characters you do have through the entire game. On top of that, I'd be lying if I said I didn't appreciate the quality of life features, allowing me to experience this game for the first time in a way that isn't going to take 100+ hours. And yet, we do have some negatives. The first one for me is straight away combat. Combat is really uninteresting in this particular game. It's just kind of mindless when you engage with it at all, because with the quick battle system, you really don't have to engage in that much combat, but even if you are actively choosing to do so, it's really very simple stuff. There's not a lot of strategy to it, or back and forth compelling turn-based stuff. You mostly just plow your way through incredibly easily because there's just not much going on. So combat is definitely a bit of a dud for me. That and a lot of the puzzles being laughably simple. My understanding is the original version had slightly more complex puzzles, but oftentimes every puzzle you run into has an immediately incredibly obvious solution, which is honestly another point for this probably being a good first JRPG for kids to get into, is a little on the Skyrim level puzzle difficulty side of things, which is certainly a bit underwhelming. All of that, however, brings me to my conclusion. Basically, I am in two camps on this. One, I know for a fact this game cut a bunch of content, streamlined a bunch of things, and I think there is a group of people who are going to be upset by that. And if that's you, this is probably not the remake for you at the very least. And to be fair, I totally get that. From what I understand, they cut an entire town, an entire minigame via like the casino or something that the original had. The puzzles that I've mentioned, they even apparently used to have unique appearances for each of the locations, which isn't there anymore, which, by the way, does bum me out personally as well. And for those people, I would imagine that paying $60 for this particular game probably wouldn't feel great. And yet, if you are somebody like myself who has not played the original, nor am I likely to do so anytime soon, then paying $60 for this version to get an understanding of what the story was about and experience it in a way that is not nearly as time-consuming, as well as also being more convenient just in terms of modern features, then it's a pretty good time. And so when it comes to recommending this game, I would say it really falls into which of those two camps do you find yourself in. But for me, I find myself in the latter one. I enjoyed my time with this. $60 US is fine with me. And if that sounds like you, then I'm going to go ahead and give it a buy. But as for today, that's pretty much going to wrap up this particular review. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. Let me know how you feel about this one down in the comment section below. I'd be very curious to hear what people think about this one, but regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.